Welcome back to A Story to Tell from the campus of Dixie State University. This is Lane Rano. Today we're talking with Gayle Nosal. I mispronounced that, didn't I?
It's Gayle.
Oh, Gayle. Gayle, I'm sorry. That was really bad. Really bad. I don't know how I got Jan in my name. Oh, we were talking about just somebody named Jan just before we started.
We were.
See, I'm old and forgetful, so you got to forgive me.
That's okay. That's okay.
So it's Gayle
Yes.
Nosal.
That's right.
Did I pronounce that right?
You did.
Well,
yeah.
I'm a slow learner, but I get there.
It's okay. It's
Gayle,
morning
tell
time.
me about yourself. Who you are, where you came from, what you're doing.
I live in Colorado. I was born in Minnesota, but have lived in Colorado for about 20 years, and I'm a retired educator. And when I retired from the field of education in 2012, I had a chance to travel to Uganda with an organization that was developing an educational program for some refugees in Uganda, particularly young women. So I went as an observer and as a friend, and immediately fell in love with this one group of young women refugees that were hoping to stay in school. And then that led little by little toward a process of making a documentary film about this group of young women. And I'm here in St. George for Doc Utah, a wonderful festival that selected my film to be a part of their lineup.
It must be pretty good if they selected it.
I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it. There's some amazing films here.
You talk about you worked in education. What did you do in education?
I was a middle school teacher in Colorado for a number of years.
Middle school teacher?
Mm-hmm. I taught language arts and social studies in a school that was kind of alternative, I guess, a K through 8, and we had I had 6th, 7th, and 8th graders all together in a class. So it was really, really challenging, but also really lovely to be able to teach to that span of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, with 8th graders sometimes being the mentors to the 6th graders. It was
Why
nice.
were they combined together?
It was just part of the charter, part of the mission of the school was to be having looping and have combined grades versus just isolating 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders. And it's particularly, I think, helpful in the middle school period to have that combination, 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds.
Well, I remember when I was in, of course, we didn't have middle school then. We had just 1st grade through 8th grade. We had 8th grade graduation, and there were 11 students that graduated from the 8th grade in my elementary school.
Wow.
5 girls and 6 boys.
And where was that?
Center of the Unknown World. Panaca, Nevada. You've never heard of it?
No, I haven't.
It's about 90 miles north and west of here.
11 kids. Wow. Well, now class size is much bigger now. Maybe.
Well, in that
times.
school, the teacher taught both 7th and 8th grade. Each teacher had 2 grades, but they still only had about 20 students. It's a very small town. Well, let's not talk about me. Let's talk about you. Tell me about the documentary.
The film follows over the course of about 4.5 years, the experiences of these refugee women. They start off.
How old were they at the time?
They started off at 15. So they go from girls to young women. And these are refugees who have spent their entire lives living in a camp, in a settlement. They came from South Sudan, Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo back in the 90s. They were brought as infants and children, maybe in the arms of parents or relatives or even complete strangers, and crossed over into Uganda. And as many people know, they believed that they were going to be living temporarily in a camp, but that hasn't turned out to be the case. They've grown up, their families have been in these settlements for 20-some years now. And these young women are experiencing, this path of knowing that they lack certain rights, by living as refugees in a third world country like Uganda, but wanting very much to have more for themselves. They want to be able to travel, they want to be able to go to university, and there's a kind of a push-pull tension for them. They get educated, they find out that there's a world beyond the camp, but then they're also pulled back to the camp because of their status, because of their needs that the family has. So the film, tries to show a little bit about what that is for them.
What was the most significant part of it?
Gosh, I guess, one of the young women, she and her sister and her mother get resettled to America.
How did they do that?
Well, it's a long process. It took them about 5 years, the process for them to be resettled.
So they just didn't run over the border?
No, they had to go through the UN and then through IOM, which is the International Organization for Migration. And it took them a long time. They finally were approved. They were resettled to Concord, New Hampshire. The father and the brother were not approved. So this young girl and her mother and her sister, one day they just get a message that they're supposed to pack their things and go to Kampala, the capital of Uganda, get on a plane, and they go to Concord. And I think what's so interesting in the film is that, the process of being a new American is so much more complicated and difficult than people might think, and especially for this character. Her name is Penina. She believed that coming to America was going to be this one thing, and it turned out to be something quite different for her. And I found that.
Did she speak English?
Yes, she speaks English. Mm-hmm.
And how was it different for her?
Well, it's different in ways that are pretty mundane. Like, she didn't know about how to use food stamps the first month. She didn't know how to use the stove because they had cooked with fire. She didn't understand about getting vaccinations. She had to be taking tests when she got to the high school that were placement tests. And she didn't understand that her education in the camp was such that even at 18, she had a 9th grade level of skills. There were all these various challenges that no one explained to her. She didn't know to bring any transcript. She didn't have an advocate for getting to the doctor and making sure that she got the vaccinations, just little things. And she had lots of support, of course, but it's only temporary when she got here. It just lasts a couple of months, and then she's kind of on her own. But she also had some challenges socially because her father and her brother were not allowed to come with her.
Why were they not allowed to come?
They entered the camp at a date later than the mother and the 2 girls did, because it was pretty typical for the people. They came from DRC. When they were fleeing their village, the women would run off in one direction and the men might stay behind or run off in a different direction. So they didn't end up in the camp in Uganda at the same time. So therefore they weren't registered on the same date. And so when you apply for resettlement, you have to apply according to your entrance date into the camp. So even though they ended up being a cohesive family, they were listed on the roster in the camp as having been arrivals at a different time. So then they therefore had a different process, different time for filling out the paperwork. It's quite bureaucratic, and I only just understand a little bit of it.
Well, if you understand a little bit of bureaucracy, you're way ahead of most people.
Well, it's been quite an experience for me to be making this film and learning all along the way.
And how long ago was this?
We started in late 2012, beginning of 2013, and finished in 2017.
Did her father ever make it to the U.S.?
Nope. He's still...
Any chance of that?
I don't know. I haven't followed up on that, but I think it's much more difficult now, given the politics of the United States. I think that resettlement in Africa in Uganda has slowed down quite a bit.
Well, how is this young lady doing now? What is she doing?
She is, she got married. She has 2 children. She's just recently started a job. She was unable to finish school. And but she's remaining hopeful. She puts a lot of her future dreams on the future of her 2 little girls.
What can we do better as related to immigration?
You know, I guess when I think about Penina and I think about her story, I think if there were situations in which an organization that's helping them make their transition could have bridges, could have other organizations to bridge to. So for example, the organization that might have been helping Penina, they did the best that they could, but they have limited sources. They need to just say they're going to help someone for a certain period of time with these following things. But maybe if there were like a big brother, big sister organization that could step in when that 3-month period ends for the receiving organization. Penina could have benefited perhaps from, you know, an auntie type figure to talk to her about the importance of staying in school or what it means to date in America versus dating in Africa. Those kinds of cultural liaison type programs might have been, I don't know, might have been helpful. Because without her father and her brother there, I think she was a little bit more vulnerable to the social pressures that, you know, my 19-year-old daughter maybe wouldn't have had. You know, she just might have been able to be, maybe if Penina had had some other sort of safety nets around her to help with social adjustments.
Well, it's hard, I think, to transition from one culture to another, especially with the criticism we now see all over about that. But the people need help to understand what they need to do, regardless of whether we don't agree with it, to make it work. What about her mother? Is she still here? Or?
Her mother is here. Her mother has had a difficult time transitioning. She doesn't speak English. She went to a few English classes, but she is still very reliant on her daughter, Penina. So the other challenges were that Penina was trying to stay in school, trying to understand the world of social, you know, interactions and support her mother. And I'm not sure if the mother needed a little bit or could benefit from a little bit more encouragement to learn English, take some classes, but it's complicated. I can't even begin to imagine. I mean, it's one thing for me to have these opinions and have no idea what actually their shoes are that they're walking in.
Well, I suppose we who were born here and raised here and live here don't understand the difficulties that are confronted by people that come in.
I think so. I think to be a new American is quite a complex, complicated, you know, idea. And the more information that I can get about it, and more informed that I can think I can be and might be helpful.
I don't understand why they would let part of the family come and not the other part. Did they have documentation that they were actually a family, married? What's this? Or don't they have that? Marriage licenses that would?
Yeah, you know, those are great questions, and I don't know all of the answers. I found that I was able to get some information from the family, but then there seemed to be a little bit of privacy about it. I'm not sure if marriage is documented in the same way. I know that Penina and her family didn't have birth certificates. They didn't have, you know, any of the kind of documentation that we have that shows this is where I was born, this is where I live, this is where my doctor is. So
this is who I married and that type of thing.
Correct.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess we're spoiled here in the United States.
I think so.
and maybe rightly so.
Well, yeah. My daughter, my son, for example, if they want to find out about their background. You know, nowadays there's these tests, right? You can take a test.
DNA test.
Right, and you can find out a whole family tree. You can get in a car and drive to the house that your grandmother was born in. We have so much access to that. And war-torn countries and, you know, a place for people who were forced to flee, they lose all of that identity and all of that process of their history, I think.
Now, the other girls that you were, what happened to them?
Well, let's see. Betty is graduating from high school, and she's hoping to be resettled to Australia. Her uncle lives in Australia, but it's a challenge. It's a different challenge for her because he can independently try to bring her over without working through the UN or other organizations, but it's a very expensive process. And she's just hoping to graduate and get scores such that she could apply for a scholarship and go to university, and then just continue to wait and see if her uncle, you know, can bring her over. Beatrice has not been able to finish high school. She's taken an interest in journalism. She's taken a class in journalism, more like a vocational training class in the city. Her father and mother very much want her to get married, and she says in the film that if they ask her to get married, she'll do that. I haven't heard from her for a while, so I'm not sure where she's at.
Would they pick her husband for her?
Yeah, probably.
So that actually happens.
Yeah.
How often does it work out?
You know, I don't know what you mean by work out.
Well, I was being obnoxious, I guess.
I haven't heard enough stories about marriages that have been arranged, because these young women that I've had a chance to get to know had a rare opportunity to leave the camp and go to school in a nearby town. So they had this separation from the culture of the camp for 8 months out of the year. But I can understand why families that have 8 or 9 kids and they can't eat, and they have a daughter who's 18. I mean, it's kind of a global issue that can happen for young women, that their families will say, we need you to get married. And I don't know enough about that topic in general, let alone in the camp, but I do know it's prevalent.
It is common in some cultures.
Yeah.
I guess there are a lot of parents in the United States that would like to pick the spouses for their children. And some of them probably do.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder what my daughter would say if I did that.
Is your daughter married?
No.
How old is she?
She's 20.
20.
And
wow.
she's staying in school and working. And I sometimes I talk to young people here, and they don't even think that marriage is something that's on their near horizon anyway, let alone letting someone pick that. The whole concept of marriage is quite different for younger people.
And you said you had a son?
And I have a son, and he's 23. He works. He's not interested in being married. And nope, I don't think he'd want me to pick it.
Well, that's interesting. What kind of work does he do?
Well, right now he's managing a restaurant and learning about that as a business.
We have a son that manages a restaurant, and his wife manages a restaurant.
Oh.
And they're two of the best locations where they live. They're very, really popular, so there's nothing wrong with that. They're happy and do what they need to be done, and happiness is the key.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think the true spelling of happiness, or for success, is the happiness.
Yeah.
If you're happy, you're successful.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe I'm off track there, but
I think you're right, and my son feels very confident, and he's learning a lot of important skills, like how to manage employees who are on their cell phones. He'll talk to me about
That's
that.
impossible.
I know, and it's so interesting for him to be pondering how to do that, or payroll, or ordering, and fairness and kindness and customers and employees, and I think it's wonderful to learn those kinds of skills. Yeah.
Well, James, our son, has a degree in food service management, and so he's really happy doing it, and he does a fantastic job, and it's interesting to talk to him about these very problems. The younger generation, now he's 35, I think, or 30, and he's talking about these millennials.
I know.
Now, to
yeah.
me, he's still a young kid, but so it's kind of interesting, his take on the younger people, and just exactly what you said, the devices they have.
Yeah. Now, is he at a restaurant here in St. George?
No, it's in Bakersfield, California.
Oh, okay.
We lived in California for 20 years, and he actually grew up there and stayed there and got married, and it's a story that we shouldn't be talking about, me and my family, but it's kind of interesting that he was working at this restaurant while he went to school. And after he got out of school, he was looking for another job, and the owners of the restaurant wanted him to take over management. And he said, I won't do it because you won't let me manage.
Oh.
And finally they said, okay, take over, you can manage. And it's been very successful for both of them.
That's great.
So he's happy.
That's great.
Your other family, you got any more family than that?
2 kids, yeah, just my 2 kids.
2 kids is probably enough.
Yeah.
What are you looking for in the future to do?
Oh gosh, well, I love going to different communities to talk about the film, whether it's at a festival or it's someplace here, like at Dixie State University, and talking with you and talking with students. And there are various organizations that are reaching out to see if I can come and, just share my experience. That's a lot of fun. I learn a lot about that. I am hoping to be able to raise some funds to take the film back to Uganda. The film was finished at the beginning or the end of 2016 and started appearing in festivals in January of 2017, and now I want to be able to take it back to show it to the people who are in it, and it'll be the first time that they've seen themselves and the families have seen their community, and I want very much for that to happen. So I'm looking forward to that process and that plan. I think it's going to happen. I just have to get my Indiegogo campaign started, and and then I want to hopefully start another film.
Do you have something in mind, some subject?
I do. There's an organization in rural Colorado set out in the middle of nowhere, and it is a refuge sanctuary for wolves. And the people who run it are quite an interesting group of people. And so I want to be able to tell the story of what their life is like, to live off the grid, out in the middle of nowhere as mountain people, taking care of rescued wolves.
How many people are involved there?
There's about a dozen who live there, and I don't see myself telling 12 individual stories. That's quite a feat, but there's something about the place that's quite interesting. And that idea of people, wanting to live minimally, out in the mountain for some higher cause.
How do they determine what wolves need to be rescued?
Well, the wolves that they have there, they have several wolves that have been there for a long time. They have wolves that are from the Twilight movies. Do you remember those films that were based on the book, the Twilight series? And they have other wolves that had been used for Hollywood productions that ended up not having a place to go. So they found out about this group, and they called them and they said, can you take them? And they said yes. They have some other wolves that have ended up there because people thought they were buying a dog, but turns out
You're kidding.
No. People think that they're buying a dog, and they don't understand that it's somebody sold them this bill of goods, I guess, or they thought it was part dog, part wolf. And then there are people who think that having a pet wolf would be an interesting thing to do, and then the wolf gets to be, 2 years old and it's chewing up their couch, and so it's through humans, it's
Right.
their choices, and then they find that they can't manage it, so they try to find out, where can I send this?
So these wolves that they've rescued are supposedly domesticated wolves rather than wild wolves.
Yeah, I mean, they're kept in these large enclosures and they're treated as though they're wild, but they can never go back to the wild because of their previous experiences. So it becomes their home to whatever extent, they can create it like the wild.
Well, that would be an interesting video, interesting documentary.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to what I learn and what comes out of that.
How do you go about doing that? We've got 2 minutes left.
Go and hang out there, film the people working, talk to them, listen to their stories, go throughout different seasons of the year, try to see if I can get up close with a wolf and film a wolf.
I heard a wolf once.
It's a magnificent
Yeah.
sound, actually.
Well, I think most animals, and maybe we're animals too, I guess, but most animals are magnificent animals.
Yeah,
And I think a lot of them, from what I've seen, we train them to be bad. I think their nature most of the time is to be good.
right.
I could be wrong, but
And I think the people at this sanctuary would say the same thing about wolves, that the mythology of them is far different than the reality of.
right. They're beautiful animals,
Yeah.
and they sound really beautiful. Well, we've got a minute and a half left. What's your final word?
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I've had a wonderful time.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
And I just think that the work that you do is great, that you bring out stories and try to get behind, some of what the initial story might be. And I hope people will come to the festival in the future, and I hope that people will want to learn more about the big conversation of refugees. It's a global conversation, and it's a conversation that includes not only what's happening today with Syrian refugees, but also what happened 20 years ago with East African refugees. It's a big conversation.
And it's here, there, and everywhere.
That's right.
And every country, I guess, has problems they have to solve. And we here in America have problems we need to solve. And I heard once that said if you have a choice between being right and being kind, be kind and you'll always be right.
Yeah, I
And I
agree.
think that applies to every relationship. I guess I sound like a preacher, and I'm
No,
sorry,
I
but
agree.
I just observe things.
Kindness is good. Yeah.
Well, Gayle, it's been a pleasure having you with us. I hope you're successful in whatever you do.
Thank you.
And Doc Utah has a great reputation here in town. They do good things.
Yeah.
We're happy to help them, coordinate with them, and participate with you.
It's a wonderful festival.
This is Lane Rano from the campus of Dixie State University with a story to tell. Thank you for being with us.